Welcome to the fresh episode of the Tech Ketchup Show, a Nerd for Tech Originals. In this episode, I have with me Madhavi Shankar, co-founder and CEO of Spacebasic, a Bangalore-based startup. She is Forbes Asia 30 Under 30, a TEDx speaker, and a constant flag bearer for the cause of women opportunities and employment. In this episode, we have discussed in great detail about product development and product management. The entire product lifecycle has been discussed from the scratch. This episode also focuses on how to build a startup from the scratch and all the learnings throughout that journey. So this episode is going to be product heavy, and anyone who loves to build product and is crazy about them, this episode is going to be the perfect thing for them. This is your host Kushagra Srivastav, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Madhavi, the Tech Ketchup Show, and I just hope we have a great conversation today and we end up creating some really valuable content for our listeners. So, how are you and how's everything going?
Thank you. All well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today. And yeah, things are going all right given the current situation.
Yeah, so it's our pleasure to host you. So, Madhavi, I would like to start off with your engineering journey a bit. Since you belong to an engineering background, and then you started off your role as a product developer, and in those domain in that domain. So, like, how challenging or how difficult was it being from an engineering background to get into that domain? Because a lot of engineers nowadays are thinking of starting their career in that domain particularly. They don't want to get into that technology field, and they just want to start off with some product development field. So, like, how did you start your journey as a product developer?
So, for me, engineering, so I did my computer science engineering in Bangalore.
Yeah.
And engineering for me was, I would say, a little challenging because that's not necessarily what I wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
Back in 2008, almost more than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It was either being a doctor or being an engineer, really. And I didn't have good enough marks to be a doctor, so automatically my parents, their next option was engineering.
Yeah.
So having said that, I did do my computer science engineering. I'm sure I grasped a few things, but I think my real exposure to product development, or even just like the things we've learned in engineering, the real exposure that really came for me was when I started working for a startup in Australia. So after engineering, I moved to Sydney to further my education. So I enrolled into University of Technology Sydney, where I did my master's in engineering and an MBA after. So while I was there, I started interning for a very early stage startup. So I was one of the first few employees they hired. So I started working there as an intern, front desk receptionist. Then I started doing a little bit of door-to-door sales, and then technical support, and then testing, software testing, and then finally, I ended up managing the project or the product really for a particular geography. Now that happened over time because of understanding the various laterals that kind of combine to become the entire product. So everything from testing to scoping to it's important to know all these aspects and understand them well before you become a product manager or a product engineer. So I think that helped me in terms of effectively understanding all the domains that go into effectively building a product.
Yeah. So, Madhavi, from your experiences, like, you had the chance of wearing multiple hats and trying out very varied kind of stuffs, diversifying stuffs, and then ending up as a product developer. So, like, what do you think, since you have been working in the industry from a long time, So according to you, like what are those skill sets that are must to have when a person is approaching for such a domain, or when he wants more offers to be open up for him in this domain? So like what are those must to have skill sets or values that company usually looks for?
So I think, first of all, it's very important to understand that it's not something that you can just straight away say, hey, I'm going to be project manager or I'm going to be product
Exactly.
manager.
Yeah.
You've got to do it step by step. It's a step by step approach. Now, let's say, for example, even for some reason you automatically end up being one, you're not going to know what to do in that position, because just textbook knowledge is not enough. You need to have practical exposure.
Yeah.
So for me, I would say it's very important to have this. First of all, it's very important to have open-minded nature to learn to understand. I mean, to have the patience to understand, learn, unlearn a lot of things that we've been taught in engineering and otherwise as well. I think that mindset is the most important, like step number one to, everything else that in terms of skills that follow. After that, I would say, in terms of just to understand the product really and manage it, you need to know what are the elements that go into the product or project. So I think understanding the different, it's okay to do it step by step, right? Like for me, in my typical example, I did wear multiple hats, as you said. It was a step by step approach. So it's important to, when you join an organization, to trust that process, to trust that flow, and really give each of these your very best so you can like progress step by step. And in every role, it's important to absorb, to learn, and to kind of apply that learning, in all these different job domains.
So like Madhi, what were the key challenges that you had while you were at Vodlo? And please correct me if I'm pronouncing it right. The
No, that's
company,
right.
yeah. So like, what was your key challenges like when you were working out there, and the products that you actually worked were like they were like in the nascent stages, or like were they mature products, and then you had to work on them. So like, what was the kind of challenges and products that you actually worked there?
So with Wadlow, I think we had a lot of R&D, trial and error, before we got to our key product that was
Okay.
successful. So and when we got there, it also took a lot of R&D engineering. It took a lot of custom. I mean, we built mission critical applications for telcos,
Okay.
for government organizations. So basically telecommunication companies would use the software in their retail stores. So
Okay.
imagine in a retail store, the product stopped working, or there was an error of some kind. That whole retail store depended on this
Yeah.
software. So it was very important for us to make sure that when we're building a mission critical application, or an application that is used real time, to make sure the product is engineered in a way that failing is not an option. And
Yeah.
this was back in 2007, back in 2012, 2013. So cloud solutions really was just becoming popular,
Yeah.
around that time.
Yeah.
And we worked specifically with Apple. So we were one of Apple recognized developers. So all our products were built on iOS, and it was deployed in these stores. I think it was deployed in about 10,000 stores across Australia and Asia Pacific. So it was very important for us to get the product, right. And that whole experience, because we need to understand that the people who are using a product are not technical people. It is
Yeah.
built for people to do their regular job in a much easier and a quicker and a well-defined way.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of touch points in terms of customers, interactions, customer behavior, as well as just product functionability in a way. And it was used in different locations as well, right? In Australia, in
Okay.
Philippines, etc. So it really had to even kind of culturally fit in a way, in terms of language, in terms of, so it's important to get, at the end of the day, you're building the product for a customer. So it's very, very important to include your customer in building your product. If you're building a product for a customer and the customer is not involved, that product is going to fail. So it's very important to have your customer involved in building and shipping out the product that he or she's at the end of the day going to use. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
So Madhavi, how did you then got this idea of your Spacebasic Inc. and then how did this startup phase of your life started off? And how did you come across this idea and when was it, and so all the entire story of your starting this startup?
I think my love for startups really began when I was working in Wadlow. That was my first job. I've never worked before that. I went straight from engineering to, moving to Sydney. And I think my love for startups began while working for an early stage company. I think the ability to learn what you like, what you don't like, what you're good at, what you're not good at, you have that flexibility. And you're growing with the company as well. I think that whole experience, exposure kind of really allowed me to identify my strengths and my liking, and kind of build a career path for myself that I think I would be comfortable pursuing. And I think that's what my previous company really invoked and kind of molded me, in terms of my career. And while I was working in Wadlow, this was around 2016, I kind of knew by that time that I wanted to start a company of my own. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I'm going to solve. Really, I just knew I wanted to start a company of my own, and I was very passionate towards the education sector. And, as an international student, I could very clearly understand the difference between a student's life here in India and a student's life overseas, just in terms of convenience, So I just felt I felt strongly about that domain. And in 2016, I was introduced to a successful woman founder in the US, and I wrote to her. I asked her if she would meet me because I was on a trip. I was going to the US anyway on a trip, and met with her. And she's of Indian origin as well, and she's from Bangalore. I was very, very fascinated with her story, and I asked her if she would help me, and she had an idea to do something in India as well. And similar in the education space, and she said that she's happy to collaborate with me and build a company together. And before she could change my mind, I moved back to India and I got started with Spacebasic, and I think one of the things we did really with Spacebasic, even when we started, one of the things that we did right was really to do due diligence, thorough due diligence. What problem are we going to solve? It's easy to start a company, but then what, right? So we need to figure out what problem are we going to solve. So I think, in terms of due diligence, we did a thorough due diligence, spoke to a lot of universities, schools, colleges, ended up speaking to some PGs and independent student housing communities as well. And we kind of started understanding that there is no technology in the housing sector, in the student housing sector, especially in hostels. And this was a pattern across, top universities and colleges and, tier 2, tier 3 cities. And especially when it came to permissions, when it came to record keeping, etc. It's a book. People write in a book, or it's verbal,
Everything is manual, and maintaining ledgers and all. Absolutely. Everything is manual.
Correct. And then, we got 3 customers and we said, hey, we want to solve this problem with you. Please allow us to do so. And please give us feedback on what we're building. We closely worked with 3 pilot customers who till today are our, fully paying customers. Wow. And we launched Spacebasic in 2017. And August of 2017. And I think from there onwards, anytime we build something or we add a new feature or something new to the product, we make sure that we validate it with customers.
Wow. So, how was it transitioning from a employee to a company and then completely becoming like self-dependent? But now you have the responsibilities, much like your responsibility domain has increased, like through vastly, your domains increased vastly. So, like, how was that transition phase? Like, since you were an employee and then coming to this kind of a job where like entire thing depends on you.
I think one of the things that was, yes, I mean, there'll always be that, am I doing it on my own versus I don't have a team with me to support me and kind of direct
Yeah.
me towards a goal. But I
Hmm.
think the culture I was exposed to when
Okay.
I was, working at Wadlow, it was very, thinking, independent decision
Okay.
making. Kind of. That process of not having to always depend on, hey, do this versus think
Yeah.
about it, let's
Yeah.
collaborate based on what you think about,
Yeah.
and that kind of a culture where it's more collaborative versus hierarchical,
Mm-hmm.
was in, I had a great experience with that kind of culture, and also I believe it was extremely productive because,
Hmm.
as employees, as a small team, we independently took on these responsibilities to make sure that we are carrying out our tasks well, and
Hmm.
without having constant supervision. And that's what, kind of drives leaderships, and I think
Hmm.
because of that culture, they, instilled in me that I could be a leader, I could be an effective, business owner.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's a successful model, because a company that nurtures their employees to think like that, who these employees are the people who later go out to start their own companies. And what a beautiful
Hmm.
business model, right? um, and I think that's what I had exposure to, and having experienced that even today with Space Basic, I try to make sure that the same kind of culture is replicated in our organization as well.
Hmm.
We don't need to have a huge team to be productive. You can have a small team and still have effective measures to be
Yeah.
productive.
Yeah.
And transitioning from employee to an independent business owner,
Hmm.
there were a little bit of challenges, because now, you have to take these decisions on your own before
Yeah.
2-3 people would take it
Exactly.
together. But for me, I have, I am lucky to have a co-founder who's kind of, been there, done that, so it's kind of
Hmm.
easy to run these decisions through. So I never had a challenge,
Hmm.
like a significant challenge. It was mostly just transition.
Yeah. Awesome. So like now like when you are designing a campaign or designing a new feature for your space basics, so like how is your approach and how is your thought process different while you were working at Wadlow and now you are working as an independent business owner or a startup co-founder? Now how your approach and thought process has been different, or like is it mostly same but just there are very little differences in that thought process and approach while you're designing a campaign or a new feature for your product?
That's a good question. What I think is, I think I have the now, because I have the capability to think as how I used to think as an employee, as well as now think in terms of, as a founder. So it kind of gives me that kind of approach where I can,
Hmm.
think, I like at both legs. And
Hmm.
I think another thing that I do is I still try to implement the same structure where it's extremely collaborative.
Okay.
At the end of the day, the person who knows best is the employee who is interacting with the customer day to day, and the
Yeah.
customer themselves. So
Yeah.
that team and the customer need to be, need to be very much in the loop of,
Yeah.
while building a technical product. The tech team at the end of the day is trying to build something that, these guys want. So these
Hmm.
guys need to be a part of that process. So I think it's very necessary. No team is mutually exclusive.
Hmm.
Everybody,
Yeah.
every process is inclusive, and there's no such thing as mutually exclusive in
Yeah.
product development, or in terms of, technology.
Yeah. So like now just wanted to get a bit of knowledge about like whenever you are trying to design a product or some feature of a product, so like how do you go with it? Like are you more focused on a product led growth or like focused on marketing led growth and marketing your product so to an extent that it gets the entire and it gets the correct user base, or like majorly depending on that product and designing that product so well that users actually come to use it? Like so like how do you figure out the balance, the correct balance between these two?
I think good question again. The thing is, both have to go hand in hand.
Hmm.
Initially, it has to be in a way where development is. So we have what we do as an organization is we have a product roadmap. So
Okay.
we lay out a product roadmap, and we have achieved. We're still a young company, so we're still
Hmm.
sometimes trying to figure out. There are certain things we're still learning in terms of how a
Yeah.
customer uses something in terms of customer behavior, even about a single, let's say, feature, for example.
Yeah.
So we have a product roadmap, and
Okay.
every time somebody asks us for, let's say, a feature or an enhancement or anything like that, we always validate that with our product roadmap. And then we say, hey, nice ask, this will be delivered in 3 months from now or 2 months from now. That
Hmm.
way we're not leaving behind the existing development or existing, let's say, a plan to go and
Hmm.
immediately fix something that a new customer is asking. If a
Hmm.
new customer says, I will only work with you guys if I have this as a part of the offering, then
Hmm.
we show them a product roadmap and say, hey, look, what you want is three months away
Hmm.
from today, or 6 months away from today, let's say.
Hmm.
It's very important to manage expectations along with the product strategy and product roadmap. Both have to
Yeah.
work well and has to work well together. So I
Yeah.
think expectation management, business development can't stop, neither can development keep evolving, as per the requirements. So I think that's something we've learned now out of trial and error. But I
Hmm.
think this strategy has been very, very helpful in terms of effectively having both channels work in parallel.
Okay, that's great. So, Madhvi, like we have this tradition at our show, The Tech Ketchup, that we usually ask our guest speaker to give us some resources or podcast or book that has actually helped you a lot, and not in just development or starting your startup or business, like in general, making you a better person in any of the perspectives. So, please.
um I try to read one book a month.
Okay,
So
that's great.
the last book I read was it was The Art of Thinking Clearly. That was
Okay,
my book for last month.
okay,
And it's such a good book because it has like about 99 chapters, and all these chapters are like 2 pages each, and it
okay,
tries to tell you all the different ways of how we as human beings make decisions, big and
okay.
small. So I thought, the anecdotes that the book had was very, a lot of aha moments, when you're reading
Hmm.
through it. So I think it's a general book. It's a book for, that could be used generally in life, not necessarily
Hmm.
business. So that was a good read. And I decided to pick up Bhagavad Gita this month,
Oh, nice.
to read. Yeah, I mean, why not, right?
Yeah,
I was
like
very
I
curious.
have been also going through, like I have covered like two chapters. I have been
Okay.
I haven't been consistent with it, but like in this lockdown period, like I have been reading it whenever I get time, and so yeah. So please.
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to be connected to our
Hmm.
roots and
Hmm.
our learnings, and really see, I'm curious about that. So
Hmm.
I picked up the Bhagavad Gita. Actually, I started off with, it's right in front of me, so I started off with
Hmm.
this, which is
Okay.
an introduction, to
Yeah.
see if, the introduction is more lightweight, to kind of really
Hmm.
understand what I'm getting into, because the book is
Hmm.
pretty big and it's
Yeah.
pretty heavy.
Yeah.
So I liked what I read in the introduction, and
Hmm.
I decided to read Bhagavad Gita this month.
Oh,
There's a
that's
lot of lessons to learn from it.
yeah. That's great. That's it. So thank you, Madhvi, for catching with us, and it was great hosting you, and we really had a great conversation. So Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for joining us. And I would.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
It's
I'm
it's
grateful.
it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure for to host guests like you. So please, to all the listeners who's listening this podcast, just like, subscribe, share on whatever platform you're listening to. This is Kushagra, the host for the Tech Ketchup Show. Thanks a lot.